Andrea told her first story with this back in 2017, which proved to be a gateway drug into a life of storytelling, karaoke, and stand-up comedy. My God, what's next? Improv. You can catch her next Friday at Lady Haha at Moto Sonora Brewing. And tonight, she's delighted to be back on the fifth stage after a very long absence. Please welcome Andrea.
Thanks, Mel. It's good to be back. Can we all hear me back there? Perfect. Feels really loud up here. Of course. Does that work? Okay. I feel like it's really low. There, that's better. Okay. We left the restaurant and walked slowly to our cars. As she climbed into hers, I wanted to give her a hug, but I hesitated. I don't know why. As I watched her drive away, I didn't know when or even if I would see my youngest daughter, Katie, again. I climbed back into my car, sat behind the wheel, and burst into tears. What just happened? Tuesday, 1 week prior, I received a text message from Katie, not unlike many I had received over the past couple years. She informed me that she was being kicked out of her current living situation. She was out of money. She had nowhere to go, and the only thing she could think of was that she was going to move back in with me. My first thought was, hell no. There was no way that she was going to move back in with me. It had taken tremendous effort, lots of drama, and some really strong boundaries to get her to move out in the first place some 3 years prior. It had been a difficult decision at the time, but I was at the end of my rope. My emotional and mental health were suffering from having both of my adult children living under my roof and contributing nothing. Now, I had tried various measures to encourage and support them in creating their own paths, but without success. So I took the step I needed to take and forced us to separate so that we could all spread our wings and, I hoped, create a new dynamic between us as independent adults. And I felt terrible about it. But I knew that I needed to establish healthy boundaries if we were going to have a future as a family that loved each other. Katie survived for the next 3 years. She worked various jobs for short periods of time, interspersed by long stretches of unemployment. She fell behind on bills, her rent, car payment, utilities. She often didn't have money for food, and she looked to me to help her out. Now, I wanted to believe in my child, but most of the time I felt angry and frustrated and resentful of the fact that time and time again she expected me to bail her out. Now, we did have some enjoyable moments in those years. We played on a soccer team together. We would have evenings of Mario Kart and Wii. She always beat my ass. But Katie lived from crisis to crisis. And those crises wore me down. I deliberately limited the amount of time I spent with her because it was emotionally exhausting. That night, I didn't respond to her text message. Instead, I texted my former spouse, Sherilyn, and asked her if we could have a conversation about Katie's situation. She agreed to talk the following evening, which in and of itself was no small miracle because she and I had basically not communicated in the years since our divorce. Wednesday, Cheryl and I did talk. We had a good conversation. We talked about the messages we were both getting from Katie. We discussed what each of us was able and willing to do, which really wasn't a whole lot because we were both tired of rescuing our child. So we agreed on a plan of action, and we let Katie know that we would have a three-way phone call the following evening. Thursday. Despite the fact that we were going to have a three-way phone call in the evening, Katie text-bombed me throughout the day, insisting that I let her move back in with me. I responded that while we would talk about possibilities in our conversation that evening, moving back in with me was not going to be on the table. I felt anxious as we headed into that conversation. I honestly didn't know what her possibilities were for finding a living situation, but I knew that I needed to maintain the boundary I had worked so hard to establish with her. I felt torn between guilt and resolve. Was I a shitty parent for holding boundaries with my child? During our conversation that evening, Sherilyn and I endured an angry attack. Katie informed us in very harsh terms how utterly we had failed her as parents and how much we owed her as a result. Her words hurt. Although I knew that Sherilyn and I had done the best we could to raise her with love, support, and opportunity, I'm not immune to being criticized for my parenting. Her sense of panic as she continued to try to persuade us to change our mind turned into an increasingly personal attack on each of us. When I informed her that continuing the conversation as it was going would not change our decision, she hung up on us. A few moments later, we both received a text message from her. "Just try not to be surprised when I end up dead," she wrote. Fear rose within me. What if, by holding my boundaries, I contributed to my child taking her own life? How would I feel? Gathering my thoughts. Was maybe I should change my boundaries in order to avoid that. And at the same time, I felt really angry with her for her blatant emotional manipulation of Sherilyn and I. She was using threats of self-harm to get us to do what she wanted us to do. And that's fucking bullshit. But it's really difficult bullshit, because it's not like you can exactly ignore it. But Sherilyn and I had endured enough threats from Katie over the years to recognize this for the emotional manipulation that it was. Neither of us responded to her that night. I went to bed not knowing whether I still had any relationship with my child or whether she would even be alive in the morning. Friday. I started a personal growth course online that I knew was going to challenge me to transform relationships in my life. I felt that I needed to create a breakthrough with Katie. I also felt deeply conflicted about whether I had it within me to do so. I was tired of dealing with her. I was weary. I was ready to be done with her. And I was afraid. I was afraid that at any moment during the weekend I might receive a phone call informing me that my child was dead. During a break in the course, I sat on my sofa and I broke down. I told my friend Zara that I didn't know if I even loved my own child anymore. I couldn't imagine the possibility of she and I having a different relationship than the one we had. I couldn't imagine the possibility of her being anything different than she was. I didn't know if I wanted to try. Sarah responded with deep empathy and kindness. She reflected to me that she knew I loved my child, that she saw it in the way I interacted with her. She heard it in my words. She felt it in the deep turmoil that I was feeling in the current situation. And she held me in a big hug as the sobs came. I went to bed that night with no breakthrough and no word from Katie. Saturday passed with no changes. I heard nothing from or about Katie. I had no idea what was happening with her, and I didn't want to reach out and find out. I didn't have the emotional strength or willingness to do so, and I felt like shit because I didn't. Sunday. During the course of the morning, I came to understand that I needed to reach out to my child, even though I didn't know what I was going to say to her. I still didn't know whether there was a possibility of creating a new relationship with her. I didn't still know if I even wanted to. But I knew that I could take the first step, which was to reach out and call her. I didn't even know if she'd answer the phone. I didn't know if we still had a relationship at all. I picked up the phone and I called. She answered. She informed me that she was moving to Texas on Tuesday, where she had found someone willing to give her a room, because I was not. That was definitely stated. We talked briefly before I had to get back to my online course. When I hung up, I told Zara about the phone call. It had not been a major breakthrough, but it also wasn't the negative news I had feared. She'd answered. We talked. There was some level of relationship still, and that felt good. But I was also worried and concerned about what lay ahead. Monday, Katie's last day in Tucson. I had a full day of meetings at work and another workshop in the evening, and I didn't know if I had time to meet with Katie before she left town. And I still honestly didn't know if I even wanted to. Yet Zara very gently and strongly encouraged me to not let her leave town without saying goodbye. So I rearranged my schedule and made time to have lunch with her. Over burgers, she told me about the living situation she had found in the Dallas area. She spoke of her fears and anxiety about leaving Tucson. She spoke of her sadness and saying goodbye to her friends here. She was afraid of stepping into the unknown because she'd never really lived apart from being near family in her life. I worked hard to not go to the space of judgment, criticism, advice giving, shoulds, oughts, all the things that I have always done with my child. I just sought to listen, to validate her emotions, and to affirm her potential and her possibility. I sent her off with love and my blessing. And then I got back in my own car, and I lost it. I called Zara, and I sobbed on the phone, releasing all the mixture of emotions that I was feeling. I was sad. I was anxious and afraid about what could happen to my child, uncertain about her future. And I was relieved. I was glad to be released from the burden of having to rescue my child time and time again. I could take care of her, but from a distance now. And I felt guilty. I felt guilty that I felt such relief at seeing my child leave. I felt shame because I felt so much anger and resentment toward my own child. Because aren't parents supposed to love their children unconditionally and sacrifice everything for them? What fucking kind of shitty parent was I? Yet I also felt love for the first time in a long time. By acknowledging and releasing the anger and resentment that I had carried for so long, it opened a space for love to flow. Just a few days earlier, I had doubted whether I even loved my child. Now, as she prepared to move 1,000 miles away, I knew I definitely did. What just happened? A miracle, really. A space had been created for us to have a new relationship, and for Katie to spread her wings and fly. I still don't know what's going to happen, but my heart is saying, fly, baby, fly. Thank you.